Roll call.
Certainly, Mr. Cantor,
Here.
Ms. Wells,
Here.
Ms. Tabachnik,
Here.
Mr.
Sorry, I was
Rowena,
muted.
Here.
Mr. Mushak,
Here.
Ms. Jordan Byron,
Present.
Mr. Bryce,
Present.
and Mr. Schulman.
Here. All right, Steve, I'm going to turn things over to you for the conversation.
Sure, and I figured what we can do is two things tonight. First off, we had have some unresolved issues on the edits table that you had kind of last time we talked. We said we'll go back and get some additional information. There are a few other items we added, so I figured we could just go through the ones we could check off again, and then wrap that up. And then there were 3 memos, I think, that staff had sent out, which were pretty specific. One related to determination of building height, one regarding LaJoy's facility on Meadow Street, and Brian had sent one out about the I think was that the 2 buildings on one lot, Brian? Is that the one? Okay, so we can touch on those 3 after that as well.
Evening, Darius.
Good evening.
Can you guys see that, or do you need me to blow it up?
I don't know if anybody else, I need it blown up a bit.
Yep.
I can see it.
That's fine.
That's good. Okay. All right. So, this one is pretty simple. The first one, there's actually a couple of them. We had talked about, it was just more of a language clarification, within the box. The red text, we had the language was something of the effect, 1% chance of a flood within a 100 year time frame. Chairman had asked to clarify that, so we've changed the language within the 100-year flood zone. I think that's just more clear. And that same language also would apply to the other 3 other zones that are affected by that. So I'll just move through that unless people had any follow-up questions on that. And this is just for the sake of the commission and the public. This is the table. It's actually on the website right now. So after this meeting, Brian and I'll, anything that's resolved, we'll clean up and then we'll repost the table so people can follow along with that. This comment was kind of a hanging comment, and I didn't want to take it out but I couldn't recall why it was in there. I think it came up in one of our meetings. I'm not quite sure what this comment was about and what it was for, but it was there. So I don't know if anybody had any thoughts on this one before I just deleted it out of the table completely.
The one that says should apply to corner stores as well.
We can't see what that.
Is it row 48, Steve?
Yeah, it's 48, the yellow highlighted one.
Yeah, should apply to corner stores as well. And what's the one above it?
So it would be P in civic zone. So I don't think you're going to have a corner store in the civic zone.
Yeah. Bye.
But I guess it all depends on what are you calling a corner store? Because it's right under the heading of artists live and work.
I think it's just a straight
Confused.
comment.
Yeah, I think
it's a
What
straight
should
comment.
apply? What should apply to corner stores as well?
Yeah.
What are we
Yeah.
talking about that should apply?
So I think because it's under that same heading there, it's just because the commission decided to allow artist live workspaces within the civic zone. And I think somebody had recommended that the same should apply to corner stores, but I don't think that is necessarily the same thing. So I think that was the idea of taking that out.
Okay.
Okay, next one had to do with motor vehicle sales and repair and leasing. The initial draft had a recommended including those in the CD4 zone, but staff does not think that's a good idea, so we would recommend not allowing those in the CD4 zone. Just remembering CD4 zone is it's somewhat mixed use, but it's more so a residential zone, so I think that's really not a kind of complementary use you want to see there.
Makes sense to me.
Would that also exclude,
Go grocery shopping.
would that,
Okay, great. Let me, talk.
would that exclude a gas station with repair?
Yeah, I think that's probably, I can confirm that, but I believe that's a separate use.
Okay. Okay, then I'm fine with it.
Yeah, definitely, it's not meant to say that that could be allowed if that was your question. Next one had to do with boutique manufacturing. Or I'm on line 65 of the table, just for following along purposes. The idea would be to allow boutique manufacturing in the CD4W and the CD5W when compatible with water dependent uses. Also recommend that should be something, it's already proposed as of right within the CD5 zone, so probably makes sense to allow it in the 4W and the 5W. And again, boutique manufacturing is something very small scale. Maybe it's like a guy that makes chocolates, or they do very small crafty type of things. It's not like a full scale industrial operation.
So
What
proposed,
does it mean for something like that to be compatible with a water dependent use?
And
Maybe they do,
that's,
like,
Does it
boat-
have to be saltwater taffy?
It could be like upholstery work for boats or something like that, right? Or like making sails, or trying to think what else might be in that same
Yeah.
category.
those are, I mean, you don't necessarily have to allow something that with the water dependent use as well. It could, it's potentially could just stand on its own, I would think too.
I think that probably makes more sense.
so under the staff agrees with recommendation, proposed is spelled wrong.
Yeah, there are a few typos, I'm sure, and this,
Yeah.
we'll have to double check that before we post. The next two are clarifications because we don't want to run afoul of state statute regarding what are considered family daycare homes and group daycare homes. So that we're actually recommending we change the name of those to line up with statute, which statute calls them family child care home or group child care home. And those really, you're not allowed to disallow them in residential areas. They have to be allowed as of right. You are allowed to cap the number of children in the group child daycare home, which we have done. But you're not allowed to say that you can't permit them at all. But we do recommend changing the name. It probably makes them more clear just for folks who are looking things up.
I just wanted to bring up, I don't know if this is the right time, full disclosure, my daycare provider has asked about if there's a way, since sort of everything is open, kind of to rewrite right now to either change the group childcare limit from 12 to 24 or allow center-based daycares within the residential zones through special permit with a limit of 24, with an argument related to it being allowed if it's part of a religious primary use or school primary use, but not residential primary use, and that there's not really a justification if there is the required number of square footage and parking and all the other stuff to do it. Why should it matter if the primary use is religious in school versus residential? And so I promised that I would bring it up, but not necessarily vote on it myself.
Yeah, maybe we could circle back after we get through the table piece.
I can't believe I even remembered all that.
Yeah.
That
Sounds
was a
good.
lot.
Can
Yeah,
you
she-
explain
yeah,
the,
that's that's probably the same person that sent an email in, so we did provide comments back on that too.
Thank you so much.
Okay. And this was a question we had left open from the last meeting. The recommendation was to remove point number 12, and we went back and looked at the text, and the reason is that the draft regulation basically allows 2 different square footages for the unit. So if you remove 12, then the text is consistent throughout.
Can you go back up to where you, the family childcare and the group home? Okay, so the item underneath it, okay, so you changed the name. So where it said group home, you changed it to group day home, and then where it says group daycare home, you changed it to family care home. Is that what you did?
So family
Right.
daycare home will be called family childcare home, and that's
Family
consistent
child,
with statute.
right.
And the other one goes to group childcare home.
But then what about the item underneath where it says where should it be permitted? Is that all tied into the 2 items above it?
No, because a group home has a different definition, and generally group homes are something like you'll have several individuals who might have disabilities that are living under one roof with,
Mhm.
with care, and you're not allowed to, those must be allowed in your single family zones.
Okay, so those weren't up for question.
No,
Okay.
that's one of the other reasons why it's good to change the definition, so it's a little more clear to distinguish between the 2.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you for the clarity.
Sure. Sorry, scrolling. We had talked about increased setbacks and different standards for religious institutions in the residential zones. The one issue we have is that you're just singling out that use for that standard. So staff would recommend that any special permit use in the single family zone that gets applied across the board. So that way you're not singling those folks out versus anybody else.
I mean, if you do that, you pretty much kiss community stores goodbye. Right? Consider a 50% setback, twice the minimum lot area.
Yeah, that does conflict a little bit with that too.
Yeah, you
That's a good point.
kick anything other than homes out of the picture.
Yeah, that's a good
Maybe we
point.
table this one and come back
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I still don't understand why a religious institution would need more of a setback.
Yeah, I'm in that opinion too, Anna, but
Yeah, that's the way the standard actually reads now. We'll go back and look at the language one more time too, to see if we can come up with a solution to that.
Okay, let's move on.
Now we're into the parking section. There was just 2 items related to page 268 and 269. One dealing with the buffer depth. We're going to talk about Article 5 a different time, but we think there shouldn't be any change on page 268. And then 269 is just a kind of clarification of the language, just because the way it's written, it allows somebody to almost, even though I think there's contrary information in other sections, but it almost allows an applicant to count the on-street parking spaces as part of their development, which I think could be problematic. So that's why we recommend scratching the all and putting in off-street in lieu of that. Next one's page 273 about EV chargers, with the change to a level 2 charger at a minimum. Staff is something.
I'm sorry, Steve, I don't know what a level 2 charger is.
Brian, you might have to bail me out on this one, but I think it's just something that does so at a more rapid rate.
Yeah, and you have to have an electrician
Yes.
also certify it.
Yeah, so I don't know how quickly it charges. It still takes a few hours at least to charge your car with a level 2. But a level 1 is essentially like your home charger, or like, just plugging it into the wall. So that would take a long time to charge your car. A level 2 would charge it in a reasonable amount of time. And then a level 3 is like your fast charger. So that would actually charge your car in about a half an hour or so. So level 2 is kind of that one where if you are putting in some sort of development like a multifamily housing or apartment, you probably want to at least have level 2. So kind of what we experienced, especially in like the Wall Street area, is we say, all right, you need to have EV chargers as part of your development. And some developers have chosen that, well, you don't tell us what kind of level we need. So they put in the cheapest one possible. And it doesn't really, it's kind of a little bit of a workaround around a good intentioned regulation.
I think similarly, level 2 would be a good minimum for folks shopping, say at a mall or at the store. If it's required in the parking lot or garage, as a way to get at least some bit of charge while you're in and shopping. And I think it'd also be an attraction for customers as well, as opposed to a level 1, which is basically, like your wall outlet, and your car battery is probably quite sizable and will take a long time on a level 1, so it won't be at that same impact.
But Chapin, why not require a level 3?
I worry about going that high due to cost. So I'm unsure of what the cost is, but I presume that with higher voltage and amperage, the cost of development goes up.
Mhm.
If we want to go level 3, like that benefits the consumers and the residents and people of Norwalk and those visiting, and certainly. I know some folks don't like to charge at level 3 all the time due to battery fatigue, but I don't own an electric vehicle, so I don't really know a ton about this, just a little bit here and there.
Well,
Could
they
we
put
look
down
into-
level 2 at a minimum, so that's the floor. And then you can always, if a developer wants to go that level up, that option exists. But what should also be required in HC spaces? What's that, Steve?
There was kind of an open-ended question about should you require a charging station at a handicap space?
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, everyone should have access to it.
I saw that happen at the Sona School, and I think it's the first time I've seen that. And so I'd like to encourage it for some percentage of the handicap spaces. I don't know the right percentage. Sorry, Darius, I keep talking with your hand up.
Well, the good thing is that you've been saying everything that's come to my mind, so it's all right.
Happy to help to be your translator.
Yeah, that. I think you probably have to put in, if you wanted to do that, a minimum of one has to be, a minimum of one handicap space has to have a charger. And then you could also add a percent as well, because obviously the more overall number of parking spaces is, the greater number of handicap spaces there are. I think it's 1 per 25, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, so maybe at least 50% of the allotted handicap spaces.
With a minimum of
Oh,
1 if it's
50%. Maybe we should take that, Steve, maybe think about the right percentage. I worry. My only concern is if you go something as high as 50%, they put them in all the handicap spots. Other people can't use them. And now we've said,
Right, and then it
you've done
becomes.
it, but
exclusively-
now it's like
exclusively
a
handicap.
game.
Yeah.
So
true.
I just don't know what the right percentage or requirement is. The state allows us to require how much? Like, there's a limit, right, that we can require from state.
The state statute, I believe, was 10% of the spaces.
Like that's the maximum, right, that we can say has to have an EV. So I don't know if you want to think about something going off of 10% with 2% being, I don't know what the right formula is, but I think that some split may be the right model here.
okay.
Steve, can
I
we
like that.
contact the community that is a little bit ahead of us on this and see what they're doing and what their experience is?
Yeah, we'll, Mr. Baker will take the lead on that one. And I think we can come up with some language that works for that.
Sorry, Brian.
Thank you,
That's all
Brian.
right.
We appreciate you.
The next two, we don't need to get into because somebody's researching those right now. It's the funeral homes and the commercial rec. We don't have standards that make sense for either of those. We're kind of digging into the commercial rec ones as well. So we should have, next time we get together to talk about this, we should have a recommendation for you, but I don't have one tonight.
People are dying to park at the funeral home. It's a bad joke.
It is a bad joke.
Can we please let's cut the tape there?
And the next
I
one
want
is
that
a
on loop.
repeat of what we talked about, the religious institutions, so.
Hey, Steve, I didn't know how to raise my hand to ask a question, so just a quick one on the EVs. Are those, you don't have to go back to it, this is kind of a generic question. Are those electric chargers, are they free or do you have to pay for that to the consumer?
You have to pay for it.
Depends. I think developers choose. Like some places, some buildings it's free, some places put in charge ones.
Well, if
Right.
we, what I'm getting at is if we require 10% like the statute says, does it have to be for free or it's the option of the developer?
I don't know. We have not, I mean, that's almost like as a condition of approval that the EV chargers have to be free to the public. I don't know if that's, it's a good question. That might be a little more research too.
Yeah, it might be good to ask another community that's doing this.
Thanks, Rich.
I've seen some EV
You think of these
charging,
things when you have
charging
COVID.
stations, and it's good to go. It's not free. But the amount of
It
use-
depends.
Yeah.
It
I mean,
depends.
level
Whole
one
Foods,
is
I
like, it's like
believe it
plugging
is.
into your house, so that would be free, yeah, but level 2 and level 3, I've seen it on a meter.
I
My
know
dad's
where
been
I'm.
driving an EV for a while, and it's different every place. It can be partially subsidized, it can be free.
Right.
You generally, when you're trying to find a spot, you're looking for something that's as cheap as possible, but also highest level, like the level
Yeah.
3.
Mhm.
And sort of balancing those things out. So it's essentially an amenity. The EV stations, I don't think should be considered an amenity, but whether the building subsidizes it, how high they go is sort of an amenity. Might be something we could require in the EVTZ zone on that amenity list.
That's my next job to take. tackle
Level
some.
3 free charging.
I like that.
How expensive is
I-
this provider of the free service? I don't have any concept of that. What does it cost you to provide a level 3?
I don't know about level 3, but I know from my dad asking people these questions that it costs at least, like, I think it cost somebody $1 million to put in one or something like that. It was ridiculous.
That's absurd.
No, it was a lot. It was a lot of money. Okay,
That's
I shouldn't be talking
absurd.
about this.
Like I'm
I'm
putting one in my house for
misremembering.
2,000.
No, but a commercial one. A
$1
house one is
million?
different.
$1
No,
million?
no.
way.
Maybe I'm probably confused and embarrassing myself, but it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money, Nick, and it's different than the house ones. Just saying.
I mean, to answer your question again, like the usage, like I put 100 miles, charged 100 miles at a station at the Danbury Mall for $15
Oh,
on my car.
Right.
I
Not
see.
free. Pay as you
That one
go.
wasn't free. You pay as you, that was a pay as you go. But where I work, it's a free charging station in the building and
Right.
they have in the parking lot.
But is that level 1 or level 2?
2 in the parking lot. The other
We
one
have one that's a
3.
level 1, so it's free.
Oh my god! So that's 3. I mean, the level 1 is literally 3 miles an hour. I think. Will
Yeah,
add.
exactly.
So you're there
leave
the
it charged
24
in all
hours.
day long.
Yeah. God, good luck.
Do you guys agree then that level 2 is a good minimum since you have more experience than I?
I mean, I definitely
Absolutely.
think it's a good minimum. I wouldn't go with the 1. I'd leave it up to
Right.
see what Brian can discover on the mix and the.
Yeah, I think,
if
I
you
mean,
wanna
I'll look
add-
into it and get you guys a better answer. I know in discussions that we've had with particular grocers, they are almost of the perspective of a level 2 almost doesn't make sense for a grocery store because you're not there long enough to for the charge to really add up. So at that point, we're like, all right, well then let's look at level 3s for you guys and see
Yeah.
what we can do.
Okay, let's move on.
So I kind of hinted at this a little. There's the whole development parcel section in Article 5, which is probably a topic we could start having later on tonight or next time, is whether that whole article needs to be in the regulations or not. Do we need to regulate the bigger parcels any differently? The more I think about it, the more I think we don't need to. But this rewording, we don't have opposition to it if that article stays in the regulations.
Is this, sorry, this is a little bit of a tangent question on this. Does this state that the civic space is accessible or has some like public accessible path or route on these lots?
Yes.
Okay.
And then the next one is dealing with page 325. I thought we got through this one last time, but I guess not. And I don't think we did the second sentence there on the column D. I don't think we followed up about bearing utilities on a new single family construction. I don't think we can. I can still look at that again to see if we can. Probably have to ask our counsel. Otherwise, I think we would recommend sticking with the comments as we had drafted them. Okay, next one has to do with vehicle miles traveled. We should put a definition in and then add that in as a potential consideration, but not as a requirement. So a different standard or different metric to meet, but not necessarily something they have to do.
I'm sorry, Steve, where are you? What number?
Row 150, page 326.
Okay, 326.
What is that again? Steve?
Vehicle miles traveled.
But how is it you, so what's the, so instead of like, does that replace something? Or
Initially, we had talked about, if you think about all the times you get applications and you talk about traffic studies and they tend to focus on level of service and whether that's a relevant metric. I think it has its place, but it's almost like the only item that they rely upon to measure traffic impacts, where vehicle miles traveled is another way to measure the impacts of a development. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of hard data where the level of service, at least it gives you an understanding of, if you add X amount of traffic, it's going to take this intersection from a level B to a level D. So it's negatively impacting the intersection, where the vehicle miles traveled doesn't have that standard. As it's something that makes sense, but it doesn't have a metric that you can qualify or quantify as it relates to a project.
I mean, I like it as a concept, right? Like if you're saying you're going to reduce cars traveling on the road, et cetera, like it definitely feels more useful at times in level of service, but so makes sense to me to have it in there so we can potentially use it more often.
Right. It's something I think we can ask them to assess, but I don't know if you could say good project, bad project based on what the outcome is. Next one is 153 related to heat pumps. We think that, a couple of things related to this, we wouldn't recommend any change to this because there are some limitations as to what you can require as it relates to items that might be within the building code. And one thing we're going to talk about next month is some changes proposed related to sustainability, and some ideas we're kicking around for that. But I think the recommendation would be to not change that particular section at this point in time. Next one, page 346, was a item about someone had a question or asked, why are we regulating fencing and screening around freestanding solar? And Brian, I don't know if you had a chance to talk to Bill Ireland to see if that was something that was required, or something we could take out.
Yeah, I haven't chatted with Bill yet. Kind of the idea is that if the building department's already going to require you to put some sort of safety fencing around solar panels, then it's kind of, we don't need to double dip. We can just go with the building code, but I'll get confirmation.
Okay, so we can leave that one open. And the last one is a repeat again. That was just a comment that was raised about the lot areas and setbacks for religious institutions, and should they have a greater number or not, but we will circle back on that one again, and as we kind of get closer to whittling the table down. Does it make sense, Mr. Chairman, to circle back to Anna's question about the daycares and the categories, and is that something you would want to consider? You don't have to decide right now, but it's probably a good time to at least discuss it.
Well, why not? Let's talk about that.
So just as a quick refresher, that there's different levels of daycare centers. The ones allowed in the single family zones, or what you see most typically, is somebody has up to 6 kids, which includes their own kids, and they might be in their house and they offer daycare and different things. Then you can also do between 6 and 12, and that has a different licensing requirement, a little bit different permitting requirements. This particular request that came in was to allow something up to beyond 12, but up to 24. Because I think when you get up to 24, then you're into more, I think, I forgot the name of the one that you guys approved on Connecticut Ave, or was it Westport Ave? A couple of
Yeah, there's
Westport.
bright beginnings.
Bright
Yeah.
Beginnings. Yeah, and that's a large scale operation. So the question is, at the request that came in, would you consider within a single family zone that was not like a church or something where they typically have a daycare associated with that? Would you allow something where it goes beyond 12 kids and then potentially up to 24 kids? The impacts would be that there are going to be more traffic volume going to that location. There's going to be more parking needed, more staff needed, circulation issues. The kids are going to need to go outside and get recreation. Does that impact the neighborhood more? Those are just some of the things to think about.
So that I understand it, does this mean, for example, let's take what is currently the A zone? Does that mean that someone could effectively turn their house into a daycare with up to 24 children?
Potentially, yeah. And I think that'd be something you could, if you're inclined to go that direction, you could say it's a special permit use and then apply whatever standards around that you felt were appropriate.
I mean, that seems like an enormous impact on that the community surrounding that.
Yeah, that's a full scale business. That's
Yeah.
a big,
Can I clarify something? I believe, and I looked at the current regulations and the new ones, that I may not be getting it right. But the issue was that you can have these child daycare centers that can go up to 35 children via special permit if it's part of a religious institution or a school and it meets a whole bunch of criteria for spacing, parking, all this stuff, plus all of the regular special permit requirements. but that there's, if you're not a religious institution or a school, if the use is something other than that, even if you were to meet all the same requirements, you couldn't try to do something through a special permit. In this case, even though the special permit that's allowed for churches and schools, but it says what the requirements are, goes up to 35. In this case, the suggestion is not to let it go up to 35. Could be 24, could be 18, could, whatever. But saying that if somebody owned a big enough house with a big enough parking lot, and there wasn't an impact on traffic, and there wasn't an impact on the character of the neighborhood, but it happened to be in the same zone where you could do that same thing if you were a church or a synagogue, could there be a way to do that? That was kind of the framing of the question. And I just wanted to clarify that.
Churches and synagogues, though, have facilities that lend themselves to this kind of thing. Like there's a church basement, there's already a big parking lot.
Yeah.
Services
sometimes, but there could be a religious institution that wasn't that large. There are small synagogues and churches as well. But yeah, that was the idea, to look at it, allowing the special permit allowance for child daycare centers within residential zones to meet all the same requirements, but not be dependent on what the principal use of the building is, to be dependent on the allowable space per child or employee, or number of parking spots, or gross square footage of the property, or whatever the requirements are. That was the question. And that's all I'll say about it. Just wanted to clarify.
This was and I think this is probably the same person that Anna spoke to, I'm gonna guess, because it kind of came in at the same time.
Yep.
So this came in into me through email, but she kind of summarized it probably more eloquently than I did. Sorry, I'm trying to make it big enough so you guys can see it. I did go back to the beginning. Sorry about the scroll.
Darius, did you have a question?
Yes, but I'm just trying to remember all of my thoughts on this matter. So
yeah, the one thing I'm not sure about, because I didn't look into it, is for something to be considered a religious institution or a school in regards to zoning, does it require that it's a huge building in and of itself? Because again, I've seen very small churches and synagogues and
Yeah, but they had 35 children in their
only
daycare
only if they met the other requirements for
Right.
space and parking that's already there for that. But it was just looking at parity of principal use and ways to expand from
maybe
12 to something higher,
Yeah, I
not
think,
necessarily 35.
whether there's
Oh.
that middle ground, because right now, right, you're allowed to do up to 12 as of right. And if there's a number that's between 12 and some higher standard that's more appropriate, that would allow the facilities to grow a little bit.
My gut feeling is 12 is a reasonable number. I'm not at all comfortable. I'm certainly not comfortable with 24 children. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with anything over 12.
in a house.
Right, exactly.
It would need to be a very
And
large
state
house.
statute
Yeah, on a very large property, but yeah.
and state statute mandates that it's one for every 6 pupils, correct? Or
Well, up to 12. So there's the family daycare home, which is 1 to 6, and then group daycare home, which is up 7 to 12. And we have to allow those.
And then there's child daycare centers, which are up to 35 with a special, and up to 35, and then like in
Right,
certain
so-
zones, and then with a special permanent residential zone, something like that.
we have a shortage of daycare slots. That was indicated when the St. Paul's daycare center was approved. I think that was part of the testimony that there's a high demand and not enough supply. So I would think an argument could be made to maybe increase it to 18. On some residential properties, it would be of little impact if the property is big enough.
I wouldn't put the burden on the residential properties. I mean, we can have large daycare programs, but in other zones. The reason for the shortage isn't because we don't permit large daycare centers in residential areas. I assume the reasons are economic. So again, I'm not comfortable with that in a residential zone. I have a couple of very large houses on my street. I would not be happy with 24 children, related staff, and parking for those houses, basically to be turned into daycare centers.
I wasn't happy with the 85 student daycare center opened across the street from me either, but they already had 2.5 acres of parking and 18,000 square feet of building.
Right.
I'm looking out the window at it right now.
Is the reason
Would you
for
mind pulling up that comment so we can see it?
Yes.
I thought I saw that. Sorry, Nick.
And Richard, do you see any impacts in your neighborhood that are negative?
No, not so far. I don't know whether they're fully booked or not. 6
Yeah,
o'clock at night is a little activity, but again.
We have one around the corner. I don't know how big it is, but it was it's at the Ben Franklin School, which was formerly Neon, and is now called the Ben Franklin Community Center, I think. But there was a Head Start program that was there, and I believe it still might be there. And then Family and Child Services, I think that's the name of the organization, is there. But anyway, there's a lot. There's dozens, and I don't know how big it is, but I would guess 60 to 80 or 100. And there's a lot of speeding traffic through our neighborhood in the morning and then in the afternoon at pickup time. So we see the impact, but that's a different scale. You know, that's a much larger facility than we're talking about here. I just don't know how big it is, but I know it's pretty big.
Is the reason it's allowed at a church or school use or religious institution or school use because those primary uses have like limited hours and the facilities are otherwise unoccupied, unused, and therefore, you know, it makes sense for those facilities to be able to have more usage and fill in that cap? Like I'm trying to figure out the like reason why the designation of like,
and I believe
primary
just
use versus not. Yeah, go ahead.
It's all of that plus they have the space. Like Richard, across the street from Richard's, the Greek church, they didn't have to add parking for that to make that work. Like it wasn't like they were buying and leveling. They already had an unused parking lot for 90% of the week, if not more. You know, granted, sure, a small church or synagogue could exist, but I think the consideration is like you have churches with grade schools on the back of them. Why don't you also have them to be early childhood or converted? Because a lot of the grade schools have, you know, the private grade schools have gone away, so they're just like unused buildings. And I think that allowing it there has been a way to like reactivate that space for, you know, the other 90% of the time, without causing, you know, undue stress to the communities because it's already there.
Well, I would think some people would find it a neighborhood asset to have a daycare center immediately available in their neighborhood. It would make their quality of life better if they had small children who require daycare.
and maybe a way to move this along, I could always, or unless Anna wants to, I'm happy to reach out to Miss Garcia and ask her if she knows of other communities who have done something like this and where those facilities are located, and then we can do a little more research from there.
That sounds good. Then let's move on.
And that's it for the table and that item. And we did send out the 3 memos, so it's probably good to grab those, and I will pull those up. And I think the first one I'll start with, this was a memo that Mr. Baker had put together. Brian, you want to just, I think this one's pretty straightforward, but do you want to highlight things or walk them through anything?
Yeah, so basically one of the issues that had come up was in the regulations, and really particularly just the mixed use zone, so CD4 and CD5, was the regulations proposed to only permit one principal structure per lot or building site. So one of the issues with that is that we have seen quite a few applications come in where there have been multiple principal structures on a lot, whether they are side by side or one in front of the other. So kind of the idea is, well, I think the original intent behind why we only allow one principal structure per lot is in these zones, we wanted structures to take up a minimum amount of their frontage so that they were built close to the street and occupied, provided a nice walkable pedestrian experience. And probably the easiest way to do that is through one structure. But as we kind of looked at it, we were kind of thinking, well, why does it matter if a developer were to propose, 2 structures to meet that minimum, or as opposed to one? So another example, we did the 3 East Wall Street application, which some of you might recall. And for those of you who weren't on the commission, that was a historic preservation development where they took a historic structure at the front of 3 East Wall Street and preserved it. And then they built a new apartment building behind it. So technically something like that, it's 2 principal structures, it's 2 multifamily houses on one lot, and under the existing regulations, technically, or under the proposed regulations, technically, we wouldn't be able to permit that. So what we're sort of recommending and hoping to get your feedback on is, should that regulation go away and perhaps not even be regulated? Because if there's all these other regulations that are already included as far as what a lot will develop as, then I don't know if it's needed to have a regulation saying you can only have one principal structure on your lot.
Well, I agree with that. I think that the historic preservation worked out really well.
Is there anything, Brian, in encouraging the principal units closer to the street or something like that? Or does it not really matter at that point?
Yeah, I don't think it matters. So essentially what the regulations will do is someone will come in and they'll be able to look at what building types are allowed in that zone. So whether that's an artist live workspace or that's a commercial building, we don't tell you which one has to be located closest to the street. They're just giving you different ideas of what structures you can do. So you could put a commercial building in the front and then a multifamily in the back. You could do a mixed use structure. So it's kind of all, we didn't pick and choose which one you had to put closest to the street.
But at least one of them is going to have to be.
Yeah, it's going to have to take up that minimum frontage. It's got to be
frontage, all of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What if that regulation did stay? So would people have to ask for relief from it? Is it a special permit thing that they could get out of? They'd have to go for a variance? What would happen?
Yeah, so technically, and this would mostly be related to the ones where they do one structure in front of another structure, they're probably asking for a variance to do that. The regulations have, the proposed regulations have this interesting concept called building sites, which almost let folks subdivide their lot without truly subdividing their lot, which could be a workaround if you're doing side-by-side ones. But I think that, there's more nuance to it, and I think it needs more explanation. And I think it kind of gets a little bit complicated when the result by just allowing more than one is kind of the same.
Building off of Nick's question a bit, for whichever building is like close to that setback line, would it make sense to add some language in there saying that like it needs to take up most of the like percentage of that that frontage, or maybe the combination of those buildings needs to make up
Yes.
most of the percentage? Sorry, maybe
Yeah,
I
so
missed
that's
that.
in there. Yeah, so there's the minimum, I think they call it frontage build out, which I think in like the CD5 zone, it was 80%. So at least 80% of your lot frontage has to be occupied by building. So we're kind of saying, well, it shouldn't matter if it's 1, 2, or 3 buildings doing that, as long as you're meeting that 80%, you've satisfied the requirement.
Great. Sorry, I missed that before. Thank you.
Well, I think it stifles creativity. Because there's lots of solutions out there that would be in multiple primary buildings that might be better than restricting it to one. So I think this is a fairly easy thing to think about.
We
Anybody
seem,
else?
we seem to be in agreement on this. Is there anyone who has a contrary view? Okay.
Easy
You've
enough.
got your advice. Let's move on.
Thank you.
With its head.
All right, 2 more. We'll see how these go. Second one is related to, this was a very specific one, very specific, related very also to an individual property, but it could be technically applied throughout the light industrial zone, I2 zone presently. The property that's highlighted here is 40 Meadow Street. This is LaJoy's. There are 2 LaJoy's to make things even more confusing. The second one is over here at 46. They also have a large contractor yard in the back, which is, probably a separate issue. This kind of came about when we were doing the industrial rezoning, and they had concerns about how their business was perceived and how they were classified. Probably about 3 months ago, I actually toured the property with the manager and Attorney Suchi, and we walked the whole site, got a really good sense of what their operation is. And it's actually kind of impressive what they do in terms of the materials that they're able to recover from automobiles and other things that they take in there, and how it's stored and processed and then eventually packaged up and shipped out for reuse down the road. There was a lot of supporting documents that I sent along with the staff memo on that, and I'm happy to open anything back up that you would want to see. But the long and short of it is that they would like to be redefined to have the new terminology as proposed. And then eventually what would happen is, if that part of it was accepted and put into the new regulations, then they would need to come in for a special permit where they would be redefined as that new use. And then they would, their idea obviously is to clean up what's there now, put a building out front, so you're not looking at junk out in front or piles of stuff out in front. So you're going to see a more attractive building. You're going to see a nice streetscape, obviously, with some landscaping, a new sidewalk, and then all the stuff that occurs at the rear. So I think that would be a big improvement for the neighborhood. They're not, they probably do generate some noise, but they're not like a major dust generator, which is also a big concern for the neighborhood. So staff thinks that what they proposed, and we work with them pretty closely on this, makes a lot of sense. And it doesn't apply to everybody. So the operation next door, which I think I included some photos of, it's a different operation in what they do. So they would not be able to take advantage of this whole thing under what their current operation is. So hopefully the memo was sort of self-explanatory, but wanted to get your feedback on the concept.
I think anything that incentivizes an improvement is a good thing, and I remember when we were talking about the industrial zone change, they made an argument about all of the recycling they do for the city. All of the cars, the abandoned cars, et cetera. I know a lot of small contractors that take their waste metal there. If it wasn't there, they'd have to get on 95 and probably go to Bridgeport. City would have to take their abandoned cars to Bridgeport. Like it makes sense to have. I mean, they made an argument that they were actually a green industry, and I'm sure that raised a lot of eyebrows in the neighborhood because of the way it looks, you know, when you drive by. So I think that everybody's in general agreement. You can't cover that up. That it's kind of unattractive. I mean, it is unattractive, and if this is going to help them improve that property visually and still provide that valuable service, I'd say, hey, that sounds great to me.
So if they're considered a junkyard under the new regulations definition, does that mean they can't improve their property?
No, so let me pull
Like,
up.
what's the problem with them being defined as a junkyard, and why do they have to have this change in order to make something that looks kind of not great be a lot better?
Yeah, so I
They
mean,
just do
so
that
that was a
anyway.
point we raised during the industrial zones hearing, is there's nothing preventing you from improving the aesthetic of your property now. So they could clean up, they could landscape, hide things better. But what the definitions would, the proposed definition of recycling operations, the line is highlighted, or excuse me, underlined here, would prevent them from being considered any kind of recycling operation because of the items related to the cars, such as the tires, the auto parts, and those kind of things.
But wouldn't that be like sort of grandfather, like just because does that mean they would have to stop doing those things because the definition changed in the new zoning regulations? Like,
No, so they're grandfathered in, but I think what the new definition would kind of move them out of that junkyard category and move them into something where they have more flexibility, where they're considered something, you know, not a pariah use, something that's, you know, valuable to the city and has a special permit attached with it. So it holds them to some additional standards, but also gives them some flexibility in how they operate their business.
Doesn't it also lift them out of the non-conforming? Were junkyards allowed? And I remember the discussion of were they going to be? Well, the terms we were using at the time, which are now moot with the new zoning rewrite, but I1, I2. Remember that I think didn't we basically make them non-conforming with the industrial zone change? Something that I remember we voted on. We did a straw poll.
So
and
we put a clause in that gave them some flexibility, but was not kind of what they really wanted.
So we did accommodate some of what they're are they currently non-conforming as a result of the industrial zone change?
I'll double check, but I believe so, but I'll double check.
Yeah, so a
And
non-conforming.
didn't we? I'm
sorry, Darius,
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, we had, I believe, worked in conjunction with them to come up with a non-conforming use clause. You know, so I don't know. You can go, Mike.
Yeah, I don't remember that language exactly either. And I thought that was not for them, but for Terzian on Boughton Street. But it might have applied to it might have applied to LaJoyce. But in any case, if they were non-conforming, they wouldn't be able to get the financing from a bank, for instance, to make an improvement. That's an argument that some of the businesses made because they said that they would be, it would limit their ability to grow and expand or improve. So maybe that's the point here.
Yeah, so the staff recommendation would be to just, for the actual definition of recycling operations, would just be to add this text in red here, which is allows these things under very specific conditions. And then we've added all these, the limitations. So it would still be a special permit use. And they would have all these additional criteria that they would have to, stick to as well.
So I just
Yeah,
want to
they're
get some
in
clarity.
They're in SDLI, which is junkyard is not permitted and recycling center is permitted under the new regulations. So that
Yeah,
makes sense.
thanks for checking that, Anna.
Okay, now it makes more sense to me. Thank you for your patience.
So I
That's the
just want
problem
to
when you start sharing screen, it's hard to circle back and fact check things. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't,
Go ahead,
we're
Jack.
always trying not to create hardships, but sometimes, you know, it just happens with the industrial zone change, but this, I think staff's recommendation here is good.
JJ, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I did. I just want to get some clarity on the intent of the rebranding. And it sounds as though it's self-serving. It would allow them to expand. It would allow them to, rebrand their operations. But what are they doing for the community? So I understand that what you said in the presentation, that they would move the ugly operations to the back. However, the actual fumes and the noise and the debris would still seep into the neighborhood. So what are they doing for the neighborhood?
So well, it's a couple of things like, well, first and foremost, there would be, so yeah, I'll back up a little further. So right now they don't have to do anything. I mean, we can't force them to improve their property. We can't make them go out of business. We can't do any of those kind of things. But if you go the direction which this regulation allows, you're giving them a little flexibility to make I think the most noticeable improvement would be at the street. So you would not see what it looks like today. Cause I think it's pretty horrible and there's other properties that are worse, but that one's definitely not, it's not going to win any prize for most aesthetically pleasing property. But if it could be repurposed where they could put a new building up front, they could landscape it. You don't see the activities going on there. That one, I said, like, I toured the site and I didn't, not every little facet of their business was operating when I was there, because certain things don't happen all the time, like some of the larger equipment. And I imagine it probably does give off some noise. I didn't hear it when I was there, so I can't attest to that. But the good thing was it's not, their site's not a dusty, dirty site in terms of things being kicked up and blown around. And I don't think it was the fact that they knew I was coming and they made it look pretty, because it's not the type of operation where you can just cosmetically fix it in 12 hours, when you go contrast to what's going on next door, I think it's pretty significant. So I think that would be the, overall benefit to the.
And Steve, I would think with the new building and then bringing more of the operation indoors, that's going to also cut down on things just happening outside on the ground, in the air. You'll have a little more control there.
So dismantling cars and crushing metal, all that's going to happen indoors?
I don't think all of it will, because they do have some pieces of equipment in the back that I don't think you'd have to build a massive building, and I don't think that's their intent.
Not all, no, but you have a large percentage of that going on indoors versus what you have today, which is, I think, primarily 100% is outdoors, right?
They do have some indoor stuff as well. I think at least a good portion of that building, from what they told me, needs, whether we decided to do something I think they need a facilities upgrade regardless of whether we make the change or we don't make the change, because I think it's just maybe a little dated per what their operations are today from when they initially were doing different things in the past too.
Right. So the whole beautification proposal is motivated by the zone change?
I think that when we went through that process of really just honing in on the industrial users. I think it got their attention. And so at the very least, that's a very positive outcome. But I think your point is fair that, you know, that why it shouldn't have gotten to this point with some of these folks to begin with. We shouldn't have had to make the threat of different changes or different things to get them to be good neighbors. But you know, if that's what it took, then that's what it took.
But Steve, couldn't there be some advantage beyond strictly the aesthetic? For example, any new building they put up is going to have solar panels or a green roof or a white roof. So there will be some additional benefits, if not to the immediate neighborhood, to the city, above and beyond the aesthetic changes.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we could throw in, because I think that the proposed regulation, and if somebody recalls more so than I do, I think it's 25,000 square feet. So maybe their building's not going to be that size, but you could always throw something like that in as a requirement as part of this as well.
I'd like to see some art in the neighborhood. Get them to pay for it.
I think I have like 2 questions related to this. I think I'm generally okay classifying more things as recycling operations instead of junkyards, like where we can take things away from being, you know, junkyards and landfills and move them towards operations that are recycling and reusing things would be great. I worry about the chemicals, the motor oil, the tires, you know, things that can be polluting. And I wonder if we can add a stipulation around that happening indoors. You know, those are contained, you know, not dissimilar from our aquifer protections, even though this site specifically is on the aquifer. You know, we have other SDLI that is, that was one of the things. And the other is, you know, we're using the term long term. And I think it'd be good to define that as X days. You know, I don't know if that's 30, 60, 90 days is considered long term, you know, but you know, maybe better to not say does not include long-term storage. So instead of saying the negative, say the positive of like cannot store these materials for longer than 30 days or something to that tune, to set a limit on it so it doesn't become a scrap yard and it stays a recycling center.
Yeah, I think that I'll double check, but in my conversations with them, I think the cars are only there less than a week. And then the oil is put into, I think they are able to reuse some of those things, but what they don't goes into a waste oil tank. And then when the tank is full, it gets shipped out. But I think you could put, for something like that, that could be, whether you put it into the regulation or was part of a special permit application, you could condition something like that as well.
Yeah, I think that would be important. And I know vehicles used to, I don't know if they still do have like mercury switches in them. So like that's, you know, an important thing to make sure that we capture and does not get into our waterways. You know, even though not all of our, but some or most of our SDLI is not terribly far from the sound. So it'd be great to, you know, make sure we're not letting that seep into the water tables as much as humanly possible.
Agreed.
I don't have any problem with what JJ is suggesting. Having some kind of public art associated with this, whether they put it on their property or put it somewhere in the neighborhood. You know, they've been, as most of the properties on Meadow Street, an attractive nuisance for decades. And I don't have any problem with asking them for some very modest payback.
Is that something we could expand to all of SDLI? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
That's okay, I finished.
Can we require art for all light industrial and heavy industrial projects?
It seems to me a lot of this is something you put in a special permit, not in a regulation. You know, we're getting it down to.
Right. You're right. You're right, Galen. I was just, you know, putting it out there.
Good idea.
Just thinking out loud.
Yeah.
But since they went to the point of wanting to put lipstick on a pig, then I say, okay, well, this is what it's going to take.
Yep. Yep.
Lipstick and eyeshadow, right.
And to the point of what JJ, you asked like, what do they provide? I guess I remember when they were in the hearing for the industrial study, they listed, I don't remember the number, but they listed the number of employees that they had, and they were minority employees, they said, mostly.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it was dozens or 30 or whatever, but it was quite a few. And then the police department has a contract with them to
Mm.
dispose of abandoned vehicles. So I imagine if we got a contract that went out to bid for a company from Bridgeport, if let's say they weren't there anymore, it would cost taxpayers a lot more because we'd have to truck our abandoned cars.
And
On
and
highway.
they do weapons, right? When they do the weapons buyback, they destroy them, right? Was this a company that does it?
I don't remember. I don't remember that part, but I would
No.
imagine they're metal, and
Yeah.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
they're the only metal recycler that I know of in the city. So
Okay.
they probably
Right,
are.
so I'm not saying that they are a bad company that does not provide an essential service.
Yeah,
However, in the past, that operations has been dirty.
yeah.
And that whole neighborhood has suffered long enough. And so now that you want to rehabilitate yourself, yes, that's great. Give them a round of applause. Let's help them along. But now it's time to give back to the neighborhood that you just that you basically downgraded. No one wants to live there. No one wants to move there because you're right next door to a junkyard.
Recycling
Oh,
facility.
recycling.
Recycling. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
to summarize, based on the new definitions, they would be non-conforming and therefore unable to improve their property if they so wanted to, which so far they haven't. And by changing the definition, they would now be able to improve their property, which hopefully they will want to. And I don't know that we can sort of like all the other stuff to me feels like separate. Like if we wanted to make like Galen said, like a special permit process for that area or something to require a bunch of, but like, can you actually say like to this particular business, you have to do this and this just like because it's not been good in the past? I mean, I feel like you either deal with that via enforcement of the existing rules or not, but at this point, it's just about making a property conforming so that they could improve if they wanted to.
I don't think there's a downside to the change in the text at all. I think there's only a plus to it. You're kind of one thing on, from their perspective, they're the only one who of all the ones that would made non-conforming that came forward with a positive solution to things. Everybody else kind of took a different tack. So I think that says something about them.
It does.
I would also say that if you want to require things like public art, we might want to look at the standards for the zone wide, so you're not kind of zeroing somebody out or focusing on just one, and then saying maybe you have to put in some kind of public realm requirement as part of that. I think we could come back with a recommendation for that and see what makes sense without, you just don't want to, the last thing that you don't want to do is just say you have to give us public art and then have them put up something that looks horrendous and completely out of place or just looks really weird. So you just kind of think about what's that's going to be.
All right, well,
Could
Steve,
that
why don't
possibly be at a
why don't we
junkyard?
turn this back to the staff and bring it back to us with your suggestions the next time we're ready to discuss it. Maybe in the
Okay.
meeting in 2 weeks.
And
Yep.
I just want to throw this image out of Cadillac Ranch. Some artist took a bunch of Cadillacs. I'm sure you've seen this image
I have.
over the years because it happened like in the 1960s, but they were all buried with their front ends in the ground. And then they were all, their tails sticking up in a big row. And I thought, well, that's art. And
It
who's to
is.
say that's not art?
It's an attraction. People get off the highway to go see it.
Yeah, so if that's, if that is what you want to see, I don't know, I'm joking now, but there are things that can be done that are quite creative with
Absolutely. It's a
jump
win-win.
cars. Yeah.
It's a win-win. I mean, I think if you know, made this proposal to them in person, they would think about it and say, hey.
And I would be happy, just
what can
street
we-
trees,
what can we
just
do
street
to
trees down
engage
that,
this forward?
yeah, a row of trees down Meadow Street in front of all those buildings would just be, to me, that would just be so much nicer, right?
Agreed.
And some art.
And some art,
I mean, if you want to rebrand, this is a great way to rebrand.
yeah, all right, yeah, no argument here.
All right, Steve, let's move on. It's already 7:20.
The last one is a very, very technical one, and it relates to the building heights. And I think first and foremost, the existing text had some issues with it, so we flagged those, and we wanted try to, fix those, clarify things, and then we have two different approaches of how to do that. One is simply what you see on the screen of just listing things, and the second one is the option of mapping out the areas within the CD5 zone that have the restricted height. And then one other question to we can do last is, we did have a request to the regulations proposed 6 stories in height. Someone had recommended you consider 6.5. And really the only reason why you would do a half story is the half story allows for pitched roofs, because basically if you do 6, they're just going to build a square building or a rectangular building with a flat roof, which is fine. And there's a lot of South Norwalk motif that has that, but the half story could allow for something a little bit different. So that's just something you guys have to just make a call on. And then the last part of the memo talks about the height changes within the floor to floor versus the floor to ceiling, but we can tackle this piece first and then dive into that.
Well, Steve, if we're going to allow or consider allowing that additional half story, could we have language that refers to the use of that story? How it might have to be used as part of the design of the building, so that they don't just get to add half a story or full story across half the building.
What would you do with half a story other than put in a pitched roof? You'd have to have real short people.
Well, solar
do.
panels would look a lot better on a pitched roof than independent on a flat roof, which ends up looking industrial. It ends up being a platform for solar. So I mean that language certainly could be in there.
Yeah.
You want a half roof, put solar on.
Although we just saw an application recently that had multiple pitched roofs and did not have any room for solar because of that. I don't disagree with you, Mike, about it looking industrial, but I can also see pitched roofs being used intentionally to not. But I don't know their intention. It's unrelated to their application, but I could see pitched roofs being used intentionally to not have to put solar on.
Steve, is this just for commercial or is it also being considered for residential?
So the CD5 zone is kind of South Norwalk, Wall Street, West Ave. So think about the projects you just kind of approved within the last year or so in that area. So it's a lot of that mixed use concept where it's, probably more so residential and with some commercial on the ground floor, but it could be an office building, potentially, who knows, that would apply to this as well.
Okay, thank you. And just Galen, a cape, a single family house that's a cape can have dormers in the front, and that is a half story. So that might help you visualize what it is. And One Cemetery Street did that mansard roof. Now I can't remember if it was 4 stories or 5 stories, but they mansarded the top floor, which made it look less overwhelming to the street, regardless of how you felt about the project. But anyways, that's just gives you an example of what it looks like and what you can stand in a half story.
And And theoretically, if they wanted to do a pitched roof, they could build it at 5.5, right?
Right.
Or we could make the limit 5.5.
Yeah, wouldn't necessarily recommend lowering that at all.
Mhm.
But yeah, you could. The only, Mr. Chairman, your question about the use, the only thing it's tricky, and I was gonna bring this up as well. Right now, we do allow for hotels at 8 stories, but there's nothing to prevent. I mean, what happens if that hotel goes out of business and they can't find another hotel operator? Then more than likely, they're gonna probably try to convert it to something residential. So I'm always a little leery about tying something to a use that you can't control the use 10 years down the road.
For that case where a hotel wants to turn into a residential use, at the 8-story height for an existing building, could we stipulate added affordability, workforce housing units?
So I'm just thinking it through. We had the South Main Street special permit for the hotel to go up to, I think it probably was 8 stories too on that one. It depends on the language in the regulations regarding conversions. Typically, that's one of the big things with the form-based code is that you're not so much worrying about what goes on the inside of the building. It's, you're worrying about the form, how that form meets the street and what the experience is at the street. So, I mean, you could, I don't know what the best way to handle that is.
I would just say if a hotel does go out of business, as we just saw, and with Doubletree, although I think that building was built in 1960, if I remember the article, it's going to be torn down and just made for parking for Costco. I probably shouldn't comment on that because they haven't come in. No, have they come in with
For it to be approved.
Yeah. Anyway, I would say if an 8-story hotel goes out of business and you're trying to market it, or there's a potential buyer for the property who wants to turn it into residential, they could ask for, at that point, a text change or a variance, and they would have to be automatically required to build 10% workforce housing, in that situation. But I don't know if we need to get into language at this step of the game. I mean, doesn't that just seem, because there could be other uses. It could be a college or something else.
Okay. Makes
I don't
sense.
know if anybody else has an opinion about that.
So before we move on, so there's 2 options. There is, in terms of how it's worded, and you could go with the option on the bottom of the page where it's just kind of lists out the differentiation between the different areas, or still has some lists, but then within the CD5 zone, basically South Norwalk shows a map of where the differentiation is. So I'm not sure which one is your preference, but we can go with either one.
Can we go back to the line item for the Webster Street lot? I'm sorry, I was not on camera when you went over that. I just kind of caught at the last end. So the proposed revisions is 12-story max for Webster Street redevelopment block.
That matches what the existing regulation is.
Okay. I was under the impression that 7 stories or 8 stories was the max.
Not in the current zone. That's the South Norwalk. I think it's the business district, and I think that already allows 12 stories.
Steve, did the city establish that 12 stories, or is that part of the monies that we're receiving from the state that determined that? I missed the presentation on the Webster lot, so I'm sorry. Everybody else knows that.
No, that's it. The current zoning regulations and it really nothing to do with any, I don't know how long it's been on the books, but it's been decades where it's 12 stories.
Okay, thank you. And,
I am,
oh, sorry, Jackie. How tall is the building there at Washington Street?
That,
one-
I think it's at least 12 now. I think it is
12.
12.
Okay, thank you.
you mean 50 Washington Street?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a commercial building, but now we're talking about a residential building in the heart of Sono. And it's so out of place. And I think if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile.
Well, that's part, so that right now, the process is, the map might help explain a little bit too. So this is 50 Washington, no, sorry, this is 50 Washington here. This is the park, so that's part of the block, but that's the city property. This is the property that's really under consideration for redevelopment. These probably will as well, but these are the ones that would technically be if somebody could go to 12, these are proposed to remain at 4, which should be on the outer.
That's what I mean. It's so out of place. Couldn't we put some language in there that it must be uniform with what's existing?
Well, I think maybe we probably should have a conversation with Brian Bedoli about that, just because I did run that by him, and their preference is that we leave the zoning as it currently sits. I don't think their intention is to go to 12 stories with what is being at least contemplated, but I think their preference is that we leave the height alone.
I would love to have a conversation with Brian Bedoli.
Sure, I can set that up.
Thank you.
So we can leave. So regardless of what we do with that one, do you prefer just the bulleted text, or do you like bullets with the map?
I like the
Steve,
bullets with the
is
map.
there a
Oh, go
reason,
ahead.
is there a reason you can't do both?
Well, we do both because this is just for the South Norwalk area. That's the only area with the map, just because it's otherwise you lose. The other one has how many bullets? You lose 2 bullets with that one.
Right.
I like how explicit the map is. Part of the regulation rewrites about making it more approachable for folks, and I think this is very explicit, very easy to understand. I like the map.
Steve,
Yeah,
if
the
you
map
don't,
was great.
if you take out bullet point number 5, then it just doesn't mention the Webster Street lot. So
Oh, good catch.
you kind of
Tammy.
need to leave it in. I mean, otherwise hypothetically could go to 15 or 20, no?
Good catch.
Oh, I thought in the map it shows 12 stories as one of the legend items and
Yeah,
highlights that.
Right through here.
Okay.
I don't know. I find this particular map a little confusing because it doesn't look like any of the other maps that we've ever really looked at. Not confusing, but it's just different. So I don't know. I would say
can,
leave it in.
Yeah, so we can do it. I made this map, not Brian probably made some of the other ones, so we can redo the map, and the idea of the map, to your point, we can make all the maps look the same.
I love this map. Let's keep this map. Let's make all the other maps look like this one.
Thanks, JJ.
I'm not complaining about the map per se. Sorry. I just think the language, if you take out number 5 under the proposed revisions, the first grouping, then it doesn't mention Webster Street at all. And I would suggest that we should mention Webster Street. It's highly important.
Absolutely.
That's what the 12 stories, the colors don't quite match up, but we can relabel it to put the 12 stories through that point.
All right, so you come back to us with the changes.
Next point on this memo is there's some text in the existing regulations that requires the facade to step back on the upper stories, which we've done, and I think works pretty well. You approved it on some recent projects. It just didn't unfortunately get carried over into the new regs, so we would recommend putting that back in. Hopefully there's no issues with that piece of it. and the last piece of the memo has to do with how we measure the height with the story height. And this came up with some kind of conversations early on where I don't know how realistic the concern is, but the concern was someone could potentially structure the floor space from the ceiling to the next floor and make it 3 feet as opposed to maybe the 12 or 18 inches that they need on a typical house, for example. And then they could do that to elevate the house and make it taller than what should be permitted. I don't know why somebody would go to that expense to, they don't really gain anything from doing this, but I think the simple solution is to measure the height within the story from to the floor to the ceiling versus floor to floor. And then, but you do have to adjust the heights within the buildings to accommodate that. So the heights that are shown there kind of are reflective of that changes. And what we did was we talked to a couple different architects about what they typically see in construction patterns, whether it's for mixed use projects or single family projects, and what the typical spacing is. So we tried to accommodate that. And if these numbers aren't the final numbers, we can always adjust them before the final regulation is adopted. I don't know if there's any questions on any of that.
Just a comment, Steve. The reason for doing that is, for example, it may give you a water view to make your house taller if you didn't have one before. I have no problem with this change.
Wouldn't that obstruct the views of other people, though?
It may very well.
Yeah, that's why
that's why you don't want to allow it.
I see. Thank you. I thought you were for it. Okay.
Oh no, not I'm for the language change.
Okay. All right.
Steve, with this
Steve-
language change, does this actually bring it above the current? I know currently it's not done by number of stories. It's done by saying this can be no more than 45 feet high. This can be no more than 65 feet high. Does this change what we currently have in terms of the final height?
I'd have to go back and double check that. I meant to do that today and I forgot. If it does, I don't think it's by much, if any, so it's probably a couple of feet, but I'll double check that.
Okay, I think that's what a lot of community members would want to know. Just fundamentally, would it change from what's current to the future, the end of the day building height?
Yeah, it might, but it's not going to be like 5 or 10 feet. I think it's a couple of feet, so it's probably pretty negligible, if anything.
Steve, I definitely have, I don't know if concerns is the right word, but it used to be, with the FAR, floor area ratio, a building, it could be, X% lot coverage, could be X or Y height. And then if the coverage was more, it would be Z height. Why are we trying to regulate the interior height? Somebody might want a 1-floor house with, I know this is exaggerated, but say with a 20-foot ceiling, and they could just have 1 floor, but their building would not exceed whatever the height maximum is. And that's what will kind of protect any potential sight lines versus interior height. Like whether you want to divide your 30 feet in 3 floors, 2 floors, 4 floors. Why does the interior matter? It should be the overall height. And if you're in the floodplain, the overall height, plus X for whatever the FEMA regulation is for the time, or whatever number the city deems above the FEMA regulation.
So the rationale from switching to stories as the measurement versus height is versus a height number is because most people can't perceive any difference between 30 feet and 35 feet, but you can see the difference in what a story is, because you can see that break point where the 1 floor starts and the new floor begins. So that's kind of the rationale from the big picture perspective. I I guess somebody, if they wanted to do like I've never seen somebody do a 1-story house that was 1 story, 20 feet. I mean, I've seen.
No, I
lots
haven't
of
either,
neighbors
but I'm
use it,
just
but-
making an extreme situation. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think if somebody came in and they said, we're gonna do some really unique house and it's gonna have that 1 story, 20 feet, they might have to go get a variance for that. But I don't think I've never seen one proposed that regard. So I don't think I don't think this change really impacts anybody negatively.
I can think of like one, I want to say dome-shaped house here in Norwalk, and I'm forgetting exactly where it is, and I'm not sure how exactly it would apply to this, but I presume that they would need to go and get a variance in order to to be able to, I guess, build a duplicate of it or do some sort of modification to it.
Yeah, I know the house you mean, Chapin.
It's on Garner Street.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I
What-
just couldn't remember where it was. I biked by it, but I can't remember it. Thank you.
Well, there's
Okay, what-
barns. Go ahead. Go ahead, Tammy.
What if
Sorry.
somebody's building, by the water and it's a residential home that appears to be 2.5 stories, but they want to completely open the water facing side of the house so that, let's just hypothetically say the ceilings are 9 feet per floor, and they want to have half of the ground floor open through to the second floor so that, they're getting light or whatever it is, they're getting a better view. Or how would this impact that? Because then they wouldn't be able to do that because you're putting a height limitation, but the house is no bigger, say, than the house next door.
I'm trying to picture what you're talking about.
But if you walk into a house,
cathedral.
let's just say you walk in the front door and it faces the water, and you have what feels to be like a normal ceiling height, whether it's 7.5, 8 feet, 9 feet. But then you walk to the back of the house that faces the water, and that back half of the house doesn't actually have a second floor over it all the way to the back wall. And I could send you guys a listing of something that was on the market over on Seaview Place that has exactly that. So from the second floor, which is only covers part of the upstairs, you can look down into the living space below, but you can also see straight across to the water. So it's like a half story on the second floor, but the downstairs has the 20-foot ceiling.
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer for you right now.
It's called cathedrals. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
cathedral
like a
ceiling.
cathedral ceiling. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Mike. Something along those lines. I mean, people do that to houses to get better views, better light, whatever. But if you do this, I think you're making it so people can't do that.
Okay, all right, we'll take a peek at that too.
I can, if you want later, I could send you a photograph of the listing that I'm particularly thinking of.
No, now I know what you're talking about, so.
Okay, sorry if I wasn't articulating it.
And also, there are people that have reconstructed barns that they get from Vermont or New Hampshire or somewhere,
Yeah.
that it was very popular in the 70s and 80s. I don't know how much it is now, but there were definitely ones in Norwalk that were done. I've seen them. And there are these cavernous spaces, with big fireplace on the end, but it is a 20-foot ceiling. And that would be considered a 1-floor house. I mean, they might have a wing with bedrooms in it, but that big main barn part is one that could run into conflict with that ceiling height regulation. Yeah, I mean, I think Tammy, you bring up a good point. So yeah, Steve, you're going to look at that, right? So.
I mean,
I
I can
think-
send you some other listings that are cathedral. Thank you, Mike, for reminding me, cathedral ceiling that aren't even, not by the water necessarily, but somebody just makes a grand foyer. There were a lot of houses built in the 90s that have huge foyers that go all the way up to the top floor, but they have second floors as well, but part of it is open. And I think this negates that, or then it makes them non-conforming.
All right, let's move on. We've got about 15 minutes left. See if we can make some more progress.
Yeah, and I think the last one on this memo related to, and this was something that we talked about when we had the discussions of the upzoning, was that, yeah, we're gonna have to put an additional single-family zone back into the regulations, just because with removing the upzoning, it just makes more sense to keep the zoning boundaries more consistent with what they are today. So the table down below on the bottom part of the screen just kind of shows what we would do, which would match up the zoning as it consists today with what the proposed zoning is. So hopefully that is pretty clear and we can agree on that one.
So there wouldn't be any change to the minimum lot requirements.
And Steve, there is no current designation for that?
I'm sorry, for what?
B zone.
For what I assume is your TBD.
Yeah, so that's something else we could, if we have 5 minutes, to talk about at the end of the meeting, but no, we didn't put a name on the zone yet. No.
Okay. Well, I think it makes sense from the conversations we've had, adding this residential zone.
I'm confused. The 3DCS, the CD3S, it looks like it has 2 different lot areas, but it's supposed to be one zone now. So CD3S, what would be the minimum lot area? 21 or 12 or something else?
Yeah, this one actually, I think should be, that should be an M. Sorry about that.
CD3M?
Yeah, so it'd be large, small, and medium. Large, medium, small.
Okay, so basically we're keeping we're keeping the AAA, ABC groups exactly as is, but changing what they're called.
Right. While we're on the screen, we had talked about this a while back, a way while back. Changing and I don't want to try to confuse the public or anybody else at this, since we've been at this for quite a while now, but and I think Ms. Lingalis had brought this up, it might make sense to flip the numbering. So we go, the kind of the transect model goes where the CD1, what might be a 500-acre ranch, to CD6, which might be like a Manhattan or something like that. So, but it might make sense in our case to flip it, so we do it in reverse. So maybe we have like a CD1 for single family, and then CD2 is 2 family, then CD3 is where we start multi, and then just reversing it that way. I didn't know what everybody thought about that while we talk about the final stages of the zoning map.
That's just a change in nomenclature. I mean,
does that make more sense long-term to go that route versus it's basically putting the transect in the opposite direction?
I think it might be less confusing, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the higher number would relate to the higher number of units.
And then we would have like CD1L, CD1M, CD1S, is that right?
Yeah, and then then the CD2 would be your 2-family zone, and then CD3 would be what CD4 is proposed. So
it's not reversing it. It's saying because we don't have transect level 1s or 2s in Norwalk, let's use those numbers to differentiate our transect 3s more clearly.
Yeah, the consultant wasn't thrilled with that prospect, but I was like, they could like, well, people that from the outside might get confused. I was like, I don't know. I think they'd figure it out.
Jump off a bridge. I think it makes sense, but it's not reversing it. And I think that would confuse people because reversing it would be now 6 is the big residential ones in 3 years. But okay, so we're just going to use 1 and 2, which were previously unused because we don't live in the middle of nowhere. and we're gonna say we're gonna use this, so that instead of 3 A, B, C, D, E, F, and F, we have one for the big single families, or one for the single families, 2 for the 2 families.
Okay, is
I
everybody,
can get on board with that.
everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah, there was confusion over the earlier, I mean, the existing nomenclature on
Okay.
our part, as well as the public. I mean, we are the public, but you know what I mean?
Okay, we're good on that. Anything else?
Nothing for me.
Do you have any comments?
No, nothing.
Nothing-
There,
nothing?
no, just announce there is, I don't know if you saw, I'll have Michelle send it out, but there is I think it's next Tuesday night, there is a public presentation related to the Circa Waterfronts Resilience Study.
That's at 5 o'clock, right, in person?
Yeah, they're doing a walkthrough. Thanks, Brian. They're gonna do a walkthrough followed by a presentation, so I have another obligation at 5:30. There's a cannabis forum too, so, but I would recommend going to the Circa study.
Do you think, Lou, as a planning and zoning commission, that we ought to attend that? Because then we have our meeting at 6 o'clock, correct?
No, this is Tuesday. Our meeting is going to be Wednesday.
Oh, my apologies.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so no,
Thought it
no,
was all
no,
Wednesday.
no conflict.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Sorry about that.
I intend to attend.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to attend too, JJ.
Okay,
Great.
good, good. We'll have representation. Okay, something I don't think we've discussed, but some of you may have guessed. I think in order to continue to move this process forward and hopefully get a vote on it, I'm thinking now, sometime in December, that we continue to have special meetings throughout the months of October and November, although we'll have to take a closer look at where Thanksgiving falls. It's not a particularly pleasant thought to me, but I think it's something we ought to do. I think these special meetings have been quite productive. We're concentrating just on the zoning changes in the map, and we seem to make considerable progress at each meeting. So I favor uncomfortably continuing that. Is almost everybody else comfortable with that? Again, with the understanding that given the number of meetings, you may be late to some, you may have other conflicts to keep you from attending a meeting now and then. Although, frankly, I think as a commission, you've done a great job of attendance at these meetings.
I think these
I thought it was a
special
given.
meetings are fine, these 2-hour slots. If they don't go to 11 o'clock, it's
Right.
great.
What if we have Steve send pizza to each of our homes?
I'll make the motion.
Full street
Second.
pizza
That
or a
absolutely
babysitter.
rocks.
I'll
Well,
take a
here's an,
babysitter, you can keep the pizza.
here's an
Anna
idea.
needs a babysitter.
How about only one special meeting per month instead of 2? And then just make it 3 hours or 3.5 hours so that we don't need the extra evening, because it does cut in, it cuts into my time that I can devote to my business, because I meet people. I mean, it's getting dark earlier now, so it won't be as common, but I've had to make sacrifices to do these weekly meetings, to be honest, and I'm sure others have. And I mean, I don't have children, so I can't even imagine what that's like, with babysitters and everything. But still, can we do this in one meeting in October instead of 2, so that we're not meeting every single week?
I,
For me, it's the duration.
Yeah,
I'm
I-
sorry, what's that,
I can't
Richard?
go all night.
Right.
yeah, the trouble is those long meetings are just a killer.
Right.
2 hours I can deal with, but you know,
The public hearings with people yelling at you for 4 hours, you can stay awake for.
And even at our last meeting, when this was the only item, I believe we had stayed till about 9:30, maybe 10. So if we were to even shorten that time, I don't know.
I'm just my forecasting it might help make your decision one way or the other. We have to have another meeting just to show you the map with the new zone added back in, so we could all get agreement on that. And then there were a couple other outstanding map questions. We could go through that. We were going to do the sustainability one and talk about the flood regs at one. I don't know if we can do all that in one night. And then I think there's probably, I have one more pretty involved technical memo that I have to try to get done in the next week. And then Brian's got a couple small ones he's working on. So it's just a question of getting those done. What I'd like to do is Brian and I are meeting with the consultant Monday, and I'm going to have them add the single family zone back in. And then we'll have the new map ready. And then once we put our edits into that new draft with the new zone in there, then we can put that up for public consumption and set the public hearing date. But it's going to take them probably 3 to 4 weeks to make the edits to the text. So we're kind of stuck in that time frame regardless.
Well, Steve, it sounds like we still have a lot of work to do. What I'd like to do is continue with the 2-hour meetings. And if we find that we're making more progress, maybe we can start dropping out some meetings toward the end of the process. And Mike, unfortunately, if you have business commitments that interfere, perhaps you come a little later or you miss a meeting, but you'll still have the opportunity to see it on tape.
Okay.
those tapes are really riveting.
Right. Oh God. Yeah. You've got to pry your eyeballs open.
You can
watched
see
the
it on Zoom. I mean, are you talking about the visibility of it or the
No,
I-
just how boring they can be.
Yeah, I
Oh,
just
boy.
listened on YouTube to the last meeting that I missed.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, it was painful to listen to the tape, let alone or to go to it.
I actually like doing that. When I missed this past meeting, I watched it on YouTube and I was able to stop and go back and fast forward, and I loved it.
Well,
Good.
good for you. It's 7:58.
Okay. Well,
But I want one thing to go into the record, what we talked about before the meeting started to be recorded. The Steve, you mentioned the aquifer on
Oh.
Muller Street. Yes.
Yes, you recall we had the you had your aquifer protection meeting several months back. There was that property in Muller Park that had the storing chemicals and doing different things without any permits. That particular tenant is no longer in the building, so that problem has been rectified. They're looking at different options for the space and property now, but that particular troublesome tenant is no longer there.
good.
Good.
Okay.
All
Good
right.
job.
Another announcement regarding the meeting next week. There has been a request that it be an in-person meeting, which means we can run it as a hybrid. Those who can and want to come in person can. And those who prefer to continue to Zoom can do that as well. I will attend the meeting in person. I'll do my best to pay attention to the people on Zoom. I know that sometimes in the past I haven't always seen raised hands, but I'll do my best to recognize everyone on Zoom who wishes to speak. And Steve, you'll give us a location for that.
Yeah, I've got to make sure we have a room first before we
Okay.
commit beyond too far, so.
Okay, fair enough.
Lou, is that for the continuation of the public hearing that we started
Yes, it is.
last week? Okay, great.
Um,
So that's
and-
why it's in person, Lou, because of that continuation?
No, it's in person because Diane Lauricella requested it, and if a member of the public requests, we have no choice.
But it was related to that topic.
Yes,
I thought it was that
clearly.
if a member of the public requests to have a public place to participate with technology, it's made available. And if a certain number requests that we have to reserve one of the larger spaces, then it sort of essentially becomes hybrid.
Right.
I didn't
Oh,
know it happened just for one request.
Yeah. Anna, you want to?
I don't know what we do if there is one person shows up or 20 people shows up. It's hard to predict.
Anna, you want to talk briefly about the meeting with Jessica?
We'll try. I had previously asked Steve if it would be possible for the zoning department to hold a public facing informational and educational meeting about enforcement and reporting zoning violations. And I had sent topic lists and things that I thought it would be helpful to do. He asked if I would join a meeting last week with some members of the zoning department to talk about what I was thinking about. So I met with them. Lou was there. It was lovely. I talked about what I was envisioning. They said that they were on board with pretty much all the concerns I had raised and with the need for more public understanding of the process, and that they were open to doing that, but that in addition, they also plan to start doing sort of regular district by district meetings and creating a new position. I forget what it was called, neighborhood something, a position that would sort of be the liaison to different neighborhoods around these types of issues. And that also, like, separately, I think this might have been like this wasn't recent. This was sort of all in the works for a while. Adding another, right now there's one enforcement officer and one blight officer, and adding a second enforcement officer and a second blight officer was part of, I think, the plan for this year. And they might have talked about a few other things. So we didn't end up with a definitive plan for like when a larger public facing informational session would be. But they said that they were open to that, and they were also going to do this district by district thing. That's my memory of the meeting.
I think that's correct. I thought it was very reassuring that the staff has been thinking about these enforcement issues and has been developing ways of addressing the community's concerns regarding enforcement. So I think that over the next 6 months or so, we'll see some significant changes and hopefully a reduction in the number of complaints about enforcement, not necessarily the number of complaints that enforcement is needed, but complaints about the enforcement process itself. Yeah, go ahead, Tammy.
Oh, thank you. Does that have to go in conjunction with the building department? Because it's my understanding that the blight officer currently is out of the building department.
But actually, I mean, one of the things I pointed out is, for example, a lot of the complaints we heard about the Cemetery Street development really had to do with parking.
Mhm.
And that I think all of these departments need to be involved. Not just planning and zoning, parking, building, because there's a lot of overlap, and the public doesn't necessarily know whose bailiwick some of these complaints fall in. And so there probably ought to be a central reporting location, whether that's a phone number or,
Yeah, like
or
customer
email
service.
address, whatever it is. And then things get parceled out from there to the appropriate locations for.
And the customer service line.
Yeah,
Mhm.
although that doesn't seem to be working as efficiently as
Yes,
it.
it could just be that, maybe, you know.
As it used to. I mean, it was pretty good for a while. I had a lot of people use it and find it effective, but maybe not so much.
So Anna, I love the idea that you had this meeting and was able to, put in the viewpoint of Jessica, the issue with the violations and the enforcement. And so what about the idea of doing a town hall? Has that idea been put forward to anyone, that we can bring all the stakeholders in one room with the
Yeah,
public?
that wasn't really what we were discussing at that
Mm.
meeting. I know that was something that you raised last week.
Right.
I tried to stay focused on, trying to get an informational session. And
Right.
then they shared and what my concerns were, and then they shared about some of the things in progress. Steve, is there a date or a plan for the informational session? And then second, outside of that meeting, have discussions of a what did you call it? What'd you call it just now, JJ?
A town hall?
A town hall.
Yeah.
Have there been discussions about more of a town hall?
Yeah, nothing in terms of a definitive date, but I think the idea is very much on the table.
Oh, great.
I didn't want to put it in as part of the zoning discussion because as you guys
Oh,
talked about,
course,
it goes,
of course.
fire marshal, building,
Bigger.
health,
Right. Because
parking.
we have a lot of newcomers to the city who just don't know who does what.
No, I think it's a good
I
idea.
think there are
just don't
people who
think it's
lived there
gonna-
for 40 years who don't know who does
Oh.
what.
Okay.
Steve, is there still a plan to is there a date? I know previously you were talking about October for the bigger informational thing. It
For
wasn't,
the enforcement piece one?
yeah,
No, I don't think there's a date yet. I gotta
okay,
talk again with those guys.
okay,
My guess is it probably won't be in October. My guess is later down the road.
okay. And is there a date for when we're gonna talk with TMP about residential parking passes in East Norwalk?
Not yet, but we've been talking about it. There's some challenges with the parking authority and the police department that the other people are talking about, but it's not forgotten. We actually got a email about that a couple of weeks ago with somebody requesting that. So it's on the radar, but it's not finite yet.
Okay, any other comments? All right, if not, our next meeting is next Wednesday, October 4th, and I assume, Steve, by Friday we'll get out the agenda for that meeting. All we need now is a motion to adjourn.
Sorry, one other quick question with regards to meetings, Lou, sorry, because
Yeah, that's
I
okay.
have other commitments. Do we plan on meeting on the 11th for just one of these 2-hour meetings?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, I have a conflict, but anyways, okay. Thank you. And then
Sure.
regular on the 18th and then probably again on the 25th.
Right.
Thank you.
At that point, we can reevaluate, see how much progress we've made, and determine what we're going to do for November going forward.
Great. It is really helpful, Brian or Steve, whoever put it together, when you put the pages and the topics for what we're going to discuss. That's really helpful to me. I don't know about everybody else. I see Chapin nodding. Maybe it's helpful to him too. Hopefully.
Okay, motion to adjourn. Okay, Tammy has moved. JJ was the first one to get her hand up as the second. All those in favor? Aye. No opposition. Richard, feel better.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Feel better.
Good night,
Better.
everybody.
Right.
Good
Yeah,
night.
that's
Thank you all.
sweet. Thank you.